The message crossed the dark between stars like a quiet echo. It was small. It carried no promise of trade or power. It carried only fear. The Kalari were a gentle people, and they had no ships for war. Their sun was failing. Their storms were growing. Their crops were dying under skies that changed color in hours. They sent a simple plea to anyone who might listen. Please help us. Please answer. Most of the galaxy saw the message and looked away. The risk seemed large. The reward seemed small. A dying star demanded time and energy that few were willing to give. Charts and committees weighed the cost, and screens went dark. The Kalari kept waiting with quiet voices and steady hands, trying to keep their children warm. On Earth, the message did not feel small. It landed in a listening station on a cold morning. A junior technician named Amy Price read it twice, then sent a note up the chain. The language was simple, but the grief inside it was heavy. She felt it sit in her chest. She did not know the Kalari. She did not know their shape or their homes or their songs. She only knew the sound of someone asking for help. She flagged the message urgent. Captain Daniel Harris stood in a windowed room when the call reached him. He was not famous. He did not lead the biggest fleet or the newest line of ships. He was steady. He had a calm voice and careful eyes. He had grown up under mountains that shook with winter storms. He knew the way a person looks when a roof starts to bend in the wind. He read the Kalari plea and closed his eyes for one slow breath. Then he said, "Send me the full packet," and he started moving. Laura Mitchell met him in the lift with a tablet in her hands. She was a biologist who could look at a leaf and tell a long story about water and light. She did not rush her words, but she never wasted them. She scrolled through the Kalari data as the lift doors slid open. Their atmosphere is thinning, she said. Their crops rely on a narrow range of sunlight. Their immune systems look delicate. They will need help to move or help to change, maybe both. Daniel nodded. He did not make big speeches. He said, "We will take Horizon Dawn." Horizon Dawn was not the largest ship in Earth's reach, but it was one of the most stubborn. It carried tools that were ugly but strong. It had bulkheads that bore old scratches from old storms. It smelled like oil and citrus wipes. The crew kept it ready because Earth was a hard school and did not forgive people who were slow. The crew counted 27 souls that day. There were engineers, medics, and 2 pilots who shared a quiet love of black coffee. There was a logistics lead named Marco Young who could count crates in his head as fast as a computer. There was a communications officer named Nora White, who spoke softly but never lost a signal in a storm. They packed the ship with generators, shelter frames, water processors, and boxes of seeds that had grown on windy plains and high deserts. When the launch window opened, the ship rose on a white pillar and then slid into night. Earth fell behind like a blue coin in a deep well. The crew buckled in and let the long burn carry them. Days stretched and folded in the quiet of transit. Daniel walked the narrow halls and spoke to people by name. He asked about their families and their sleep. He checked the list of supplies and ran his finger down the lines. Laura sat with the data from the Kalari and built simple models. She looked for sweet spots where air, light, and soil could meet in balance. She wrote notes for a plan that did not yet exist. No one on board used the word hero. It was not a useful word. Earth did not make heroes on purpose. Earth made people who kept going when the wind bit their skin and the ground shook under their boots. Earth made people who learned to build a fire in the rain. Their ancestors had stood in floods and droughts and winters that came too early. That history did not make them cruel. It made them patient. It made them stubborn in a way that looked strange from the outside. On the 9th day, Horizon Dawn dropped into the Kalari system. The screens filled with a pale star that flickered in an uneven way. Sensor boards lit with warnings and small angry beeps. The nearest planet, Kellar, wore a belt of copper clouds that swirled and tore and reformed. Lightning walked across the dark plains in long, bright lines. Nora pushed her headset closer and said, "We are on approach open channel." The reply came slow and gentle. "This is Alien of the Kalari Council. We hear you, Earth vessel. You heard us and you came." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. He looked at Laura and gave a short nod. Then he said into the mic, "This is Captain Harris of Horizon Dawn. We came to help if we can. We will not promise more than we can do, but we will work. Please send a safe landing field if you have one." Alien's voice shook a little. "We have a field," they said. "The storms move, but we will guide you between them. Please be careful." Daniel said, "We will be careful," and he meant it. The landing was rough even by Earth standards. The ship hit a crosswind that turned like a live thing. The pilots kept their hands steady and argued softly with the warning lights. The hull hummed as it fought the air. When the feet touched down, the crew did not cheer. They exhaled. They checked readouts. They unlatched their straps with quiet hands and stood up into the work. The first breath outside felt thin and sharp. The ground was a cracked plain with low shadows that moved when the cloud cover shifted. The Kalari waited by the edge of the landing field. They were tall and slight. Their skin carried a faint pattern like ripples in a pond. Their eyes were wide in a way that made their faces look always a little surprised. They wore soft cloths that wrapped and tied without buckles. Alien stepped forward with two others. They bowed their heads. "We are grateful," they said. "You came when no one else would." Daniel did not make a speech. He said, "We will start with the shelters," and he pointed to the crates. Laura added, "We will set up a clean water line and a field clinic. We will take samples of your crops and soil. We will try to stretch what you have while we work on next steps." Alien nodded and gestured to the far end of the field where a line of small houses leaned against the wind. Children watched with careful eyes from doorways. When one of the children stepped forward and stumbled in the gust, a human engineer named Grace Carter moved without thinking. She knelt and steadied the child and smiled. The child stared at her hands and then smiled back, small and shy. By evening, the first shelter frame stood against the wind like a row of square trees. The crew worked in pairs. They moved with a rhythm that came from long practice. Close a latch, seal a seam, anchor a line. Nora marked each completed shelter on her board. Marco kept the flow of crates moving. Laura walked between teams and checked the med kits. She adjusted masks for Kalari workers and wrote simple notes to show them how to change filters. She tried to match her voice to their calm cadence. She felt the fear under it and met it with steady words. In the field clinic tent, the air smelled of antiseptic and the metallic hint of recycled water. A line formed, slow and quiet. The Kalari did not push. They held each other's hands and took turns. The medic, Ethan Cole, listened to hearts and lungs through a scanner and watched the oxygen numbers with a careful frown. He spoke gently and gave out small packets of supplements that would help for a while. He did not lie about the limits. "This will help your breathing for a few days," he said. "We have more if you need them. We are working on a longer plan." Elian walked the camp in the fading light with Daniel and Laura. The sky shifted from copper to a thin silver, and then to a dull violet. The wind dropped. For a few minutes it was almost still. Alien said, "We asked so many for help." Most sent polite words. Some sent a list of fees and dates far in the future. "You came fast. You do not seem to be afraid of our storms." Daniel watched the horizon. He said, "Storms are not our enemies. They are part of where we come from." He looked at the cracked ground and then at the small houses. He said, "We cannot stop your son from failing. But we can try to buy you time and build a path." Laura added, "We will keep your people breathing and fed. Then we will help you move or help you change to a new home that will not break your bodies." Elian's voice grew softer. "We do not understand Earth," they said. "We hear others call you Deathworlders. They say your home is too hard. They say you are too rough." Laura thought for a moment. Then she said, "Earth is hard sometimes. It teaches lessons that sting. People survive by being careful with each other. We fix roofs together when they lift in the wind. We pull cars from snow with ropes and bare hands. We do not see that as rough. We see it as normal." Alien looked at Daniel. "And you, Captain?" Daniel shrugged very slightly. He said, "Where I grew up, winter broke fences every year. We built better fences every spring. That is all." Night brought a thin cold that moved through the camp like a slow tide. The generators hummed. The shelter stove units ticked as they warmed. In the clinic tent, Ethan checked on a child with a shallow cough. He showed the child a small light and let them press the button to turn it on and off. The child laughed. Laura stood in the doorway and felt the sound settle in her chest. She looked up at the sky. The alien moon was a chipped coin behind fast clouds. She thought about the models on her tablet and the idea of moving a people to a moon. It was not simple. But hard did not mean impossible. Near midnight, a sharp gust hit the camp and sent a line of dust across the landing field. A stack of crates rocked and slid. Marco shouted for straps and 3 hands reached at once. "Dunny." The second morning on Kalar began with low clouds that rolled fast across the sky. The light from the failing star gave the land a pale glow, as if the world had been painted in dust and silver. The humans of Horizon Dawn rose early, shaking off the thin sleep that comes in a new place. They stepped outside into the cold air and began to work without waiting for orders. They knew there was too much to do. The shelters had to be reinforced, the water lines checked, and the food stocks stretched. Daniel Harris walked the rows with quiet steps. He carried no weapon, only a data pad and a calm voice. He stopped by each shelter and asked simple questions. Are you warm enough? Is the filter working? Did the stove light? He listened to the Kalari who answered in their slow musical speech. Many of them bowed slightly before speaking, their wide eyes filled with a mix of respect and worry. Daniel did not bow back. He nodded, short and steady. He wanted them to see his face clear, not hidden in ritual. Laura Mitchell sat near the field clinic, her table covered with samples. She had collected pieces of soil, stalks from the Kalari crops, and small cups of water. She worked with 2 Kalari scientists who wore long robes tied at the waist with cords. Their names were Cyril and Daran. They moved carefully, touching each tool as if it might break. Laura showed them how to adjust a simple microscope. She guided their hands, then let them take the lead. They whispered to each other in their own tongue, then looked at her with wonder. She smiled and wrote down the results in slow letters so they could copy them. Grace Carter and Marco Young were at the supply stacks. The wind had shifted in the night, moving dust into corners. They hauled crates onto sleds and pulled them closer to the shelter lines. Marco counted aloud, ticking each box off a list. Grace tightened straps with gloved hands. She glanced at the Kalari children who watched them work. One small boy edged forward until he was only a few steps away. Grace crouched and pulled a strip of cloth from her pocket. She tied it around his wrist like a band. The boy's eyes widened, then he ran back to his group, holding up the cloth like a prize. Inside the clinic, Ethan Cole checked patients with steady care. He scanned lungs, measured oxygen levels, and handed out small pills that eased breathing. A Kalari mother sat with her child in her lap, waiting for their turn. The child coughed, a thin rasp. Ethan knelt in front of them and spoke softly. He gave the child a tablet that dissolved in water. The mother's hands shook as she held the cup. Ethan covered her hands with his own for a moment, then stepped back to let them drink in peace. At midday, Alien came to the human camp again. Their robe was drawn tight against the wind. They walked with slow dignity, but their face was tired. They spoke with Daniel and Laura together. You have done much in one day, they said. Our people speak of you already. But they also ask, how long can you stay? Daniel looked at Laura. She gave a slight nod. He turned back to Alien and said, We will stay as long as we are able. We will not leave until you have a path to live. Alien's eyes grew wet. They pressed a hand to their chest and bowed low. In the afternoon, storms began to rise again. Dark clouds tore across the plains. The humans worked faster, anchoring new lines and checking every joint of the shelters. Marco shouted for 2 more anchors, and Grace hammered them deep into the soil. Laura and Cyril packed the samples into sealed boxes and moved them inside. Daniel stood by the landing field, watching the sky. The storm was strong, but it was not yet the worst. He had seen storms like this on Earth. He knew they would pass. But he also knew the storms would return, stronger each time, until the star gave out for good. When the first heavy gusts hit, the shelters shook but held. The generators hummed and the heaters stayed lit. The Kalari gathered close together inside. They watched the walls tremble, then looked at the humans. The humans did not panic. They moved from shelter to shelter, checking ties and seals. Their calm spread like a slow warmth. By nightfall, the storm eased. The camp was still standing. The Kalari stepped outside and whispered in their own tongue. Some of them smiled for the first time in weeks. That night, Daniel called a meeting inside the main shelter. The crew gathered around a table lit by a single lamp. Laura spread out her notes. She spoke in clear, simple words. The soil is thin. It has lost much of its life. The water is unstable. The star is breaking. If we leave the Kalari here, they will not last long. But there is a moon nearby with promise. Its ground is stable. Its air is thin but can be shaped. We can begin work there. She looked around the table. It will take more than we have. But it can be done. Daniel listened in silence, then said, Then that is the path. We will begin to prepare them for a move. The next day, they started to teach. Laura and Cyril set up small groups of Kalari farmers. They showed them how to plant earth seeds in boxes of mixed soil. They explained how light could be bent with simple screens. The Kalari listened with sharp focus. They repeated the steps slowly until they could do them without guidance. Laura smiled when she saw a small sprout push through the soil after only hours. She said softly, "Life wants to live." Meanwhile, Daniel worked with Alien to plan evacuation lines. They marked maps with stones and lines of ink. Alien traced paths with long fingers. Their voice was heavy but calm. "We will need to move our elders first," they said. "Then the young. Then the strong who can build," Daniel agreed. He said, "We will not rush you, but we will not wait too long. Each day matters." Alien nodded and folded the map with care. In the camp, bonds between humans and Kalari grew quickly. Nora White taught Kalari children simple words of English, while they taught her songs in their language. Grace showed a group of Kalari how to tie knots that held against the wind. Marco laughed when a Kalari elder beat him at a game of counting stones. Ethan let Kalari youths help in the clinic by holding instruments steady. The work was hard, but there was laughter in small corners. But not all news was good. Late in the evening, a message arrived on Nora's console. It came from a nearby trade hub. The words were sharp and cold. "Earth, cease your actions. You have no right to intervene without sanction. Remove your presence at once or face penalties." Nora read it aloud to Daniel. The crew looked at him in silence. He did not raise his voice. He said, "We came because someone asked. That is right enough." "We will not leave," Laura added. "Lives come before papers. That is all that matters." The Kalari did not know of this message. They only saw the humans keep working, even when the nights grew colder. The second storm of the week came, stronger than the first. A roof frame bent. 3 lines snapped, but the humans fixed them in the wind itself, hands steady, eyes clear. The Kalari watched in awe. They began to call the humans a new word in their language. It meant those who stand in the storm. On the 7th day, Daniel walked alone to the edge of the plain. The star was weak above him, flickering like a candle about to die. He thought of Earth, of its mountains and rivers, its storms and quakes. He thought of how people had always learned to live with hardship, not in spite of it, but with it. He looked back at the camp, at the shelters glowing with light, at the Kalari and humans working side by side. He felt no pride, only duty. He whispered to himself, "This is what we do." That night, the crew sat together for a short meal. The air smelled of broth and grain, laughter mixed with tired sighs. Laura leaned back, her eyes half closed. Daniel looked around the table at his people. He thought of the path ahead. It would be long. It would be hard. But he believed it was possible. He knew they would not stop until the Kalari had a future. Far above, the galaxy kept turning. Other worlds still looked away, but here on a cracked plain under a broken star, strangers had become allies. The plea for help had been answered, not with words, but with hands and sweat and quiet courage. The Kalari had asked the galaxy. The galaxy had turned away. But Earth had come, and Earth would stay. The days that followed were filled with work that did not stop. Each sunrise brought a new task, and each sunset ended with tired but steady hands. The Kalari had begun to trust the humans in ways that surprised even themselves. They watched the crew of Horizon Dawn move through storms, fix broken shelters, and build order in a world that was falling apart. The Kalari had once believed that no one would come for them. Now they saw humans as proof that even in a wide, cold galaxy, some would still choose to stand beside them. Daniel Harris led without raising his voice. He walked through the camp every morning, speaking to both humans and Kalari. He checked the water systems, looked at the maps, and asked simple questions about health and food. He never rushed, but he never wasted time. He had grown up in a place where winter punished the careless. He knew the value of small checks and small words that kept people steady. The Kalari began to copy his calm tone. When storms hit, they said to each other, "It will pass, like Captain Harris says." Laura Mitchell worked in the lab tent that had been built from fabric and metal poles. She studied soil samples under weak light, her hands always moving across notes and screens. With Sorel and Duran, she tried mixing earth seeds with Kalari soil. Most attempts failed at first, but some small sprouts lived longer each day. When a pale green shoot survived through a storm night, Sorel clapped softly and whispered in his own tongue. Laura smiled, tired but proud. Life was fragile, but it wanted to grow. Grace Carter taught Kalari families how to use the new shelters. She showed them how to anchor lines, close seals, and use heaters safely. Children followed her around, copying her movements. When she laughed, they laughed too. Grace did not see herself as a teacher, but the Kalari listened to her as if her words were gold. She carried herself with quiet warmth, and it spread in every corner she walked into. Ethan Cole kept the clinic running. He worked with 2 Kalari youths who wanted to learn healing. He showed them how to clean instruments, how to check breathing, and how to record numbers. They watched his hands carefully and tried to copy his movements. Ethan encouraged them, reminding them that their people would need healers long after the humans left. His words planted seeds of confidence that grew day by day. But not everything was steady. On the 3rd week, the crew received another message through Nora White's console. It was short and harsh. Earth vessels, you act without sanction. Your actions threaten balance. Withdraw at once. If you do not, we will take steps. Nora read the message in a flat tone, her face calm though her heart beat faster. She passed the message to Daniel. He read it, then placed it on the table. His voice stayed steady. We will not leave, he said. They asked for help. That is enough. The Kalari did not hear about these threats. Daniel kept them from worry. He told the crew that they must work faster. They would build the first steps of the evacuation before anyone could stop them. The plan to move people to the nearby moon grew clearer. Laura confirmed that the moon's ground was strong. Its thin air could be thickened with machines. Seeds from Earth could grow there. Daniel decided that they would begin to move supplies within the next cycle. To prepare, teams went out beyond the camp. The plains around Kalar stretched far, broken by sharp ridges and deep cracks in the ground. Marco led a team to map the safe paths. They carried scanners and ropes marking each stable step. The Kalari joined them, showing secret ways they had used for centuries. Together they drew lines across the land. At night they laid the maps on tables, tracing routes with calloused fingers. The humans brought the tools, but the Kalari brought memory of the land. Together they built a plan. Storms made this work harder. One afternoon, a storm hit with winds stronger than any before. The sky turned black and copper. Shelters bent and creaked. A water line snapped and sprayed across the field. Grace and 2 Kalari men rushed into the wind, their bodies leaning forward as if walking through a wall. They fixed the line with frozen fingers while dust cut their skin. Daniel pulled them back only when the seal was tight. Inside the shelters, Kalari families listened to the storm and whispered, "The humans stand with us." "We will stand too." The bond between the 2 peoples deepened. Kalari children began to play near the humans even during work hours. They carried small tools, pretending to build and repair. Some sang short songs about storms passing. Nora White recorded one of the songs and played it back to them through her console. The children laughed, their eyes wide at hearing their own voices echo back. In those small moments, fear gave way to hope. Still, the crew knew danger was not only from nature. On the horizon, ships began to appear. They did not land, but they circled the system like predators watching prey. They sent no greetings. They simply watched. Daniel knew what it meant. Other powers in the galaxy feared what Earth was doing. They feared that if humanity gained trust from the Kalari, others would turn to them in times of need. He told the crew to prepare for interference. They would not fight unless forced, but they would not yield either. One night while the camp rested, Daniel walked with Alien. They moved slowly along the edge of the shelters. Alien spoke with heavy sadness. Our people once believed the stars were kind. We thought if trouble came, we would not be alone. But when we asked, almost no one listened. Then you came. You risked storms and threats from others. Why do you do this? Daniel looked at the cracked ground under his boots. He answered, because you asked. That is reason enough. On Earth, when someone calls for help in a storm, you answer. Alien stopped walking and bowed deeply. From this night, they said, the Kalari are bound to Earth. The next day, Laura presented her first real results. A crop of mixed grain had survived in a sealed box with filtered air. She brought Alien and several Kalari elders to see it. They touched the green shoots with careful fingers. Their eyes filled with tears. Life can go with us, Laura explained. We can take it to your new home. You will not starve. The elders pressed their hands to their hearts and thanked her in quiet voices. Laura felt her throat tighten. She had worked long nights, and now she saw proof that the Kalari could have a future. By the 4th week, preparations for evacuation were underway. Supplies were packed into crates marked with clear symbols for Kalari to read. Training sessions were held every day. Humans showed Kalari how to use machines that purified air and water. Kalari elders taught humans how to read the land for signs of cracks before they split open. Both sides learned, both sides taught. The camp was no longer two peoples. It was one. Yet the pressure from outside grew heavier. Nora intercepted coded messages that spoke of blockades and sanctions. Daniel gathered the crew one night and spoke plainly. Others may come to stop us. They may cut our supply lines. They may threaten us. But we will not stop. We will stand with the Kalari until they are safe. His crew nodded. They were tired, but their eyes were clear. They had chosen this path, and they would not turn back. The Kalari began to show signs of new strength. Their voices grew louder in meetings. They made decisions for their own people again. They walked with humans to set anchors, to plant test crops, to carry supplies. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled them. Hope had taken root. One evening, when the sun flickered weak and low, a Kalari child sang a song that drifted across the camp. The words were simple, about light and shelter and strong hands. Humans and Kalari alike stopped to listen. When the song ended, Daniel looked around the camp. For the first time, he saw not only survival but life. The Kalari were not just waiting to be saved. They were standing up beside the humans, ready to face what came next. The galaxy still watched from afar, cold and cautious. But here in the dust and storm of Kalar, something new had begun. It was not power. It was not wealth. It was the simple bond of two peoples who chose to stand together. The Kalari had asked for help, and Earth had answered. And now, step by step, they were building a future that no storm could erase. The fourth stage of their work began with tension. The camp was no longer just a place of survival. It had become the center of a growing plan. The Kalari were no longer only waiting. They were working with the humans as partners. They planted crops in sealed boxes, learned to operate water filters, and carried crates side by side with Earth's crew. The bond was strong, but the shadow of outside pressure grew heavier every day. More ships appeared in the system, silent and cold. They did not send help. They only circled, watching. Daniel Harris stood on the landing field one morning, looking up at those ships. His face stayed calm, but his thoughts were sharp. He knew that one wrong move could bring trouble down on them. Yet he also knew that stopping now would mean death for the Kalari. He turned back to the camp. "We keep going," he told Nora White. She nodded, already working to keep their signals tight and steady. She sent coded updates to Earth, though she did not know if all of them would get through. Some signals were being blocked, but she kept trying. Inside the lab tent, Laura Mitchell bent over her plants. Her hands were steady even though her eyes were red with fatigue. She had found a strain of grain that held against Kalar's thin soil when mixed with Earth's seed stock. Sorel and Duran worked beside her, their faces bright with hope. "We can grow this on the moon," Laura said, showing them the strong roots. "If we bring enough samples, you will not go hungry." Sorel whispered, "Life will follow us." Darren closed his eyes as if sending a silent prayer. Laura felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was not victory yet, but it was proof they were moving in the right direction. Grace Carter led teams to reinforce the shelters. The storms were getting worse as the star grew weaker. Anchors went deeper, walls were doubled, and lines were checked again and again. Kalari youths joined her, learning how to tie knots that did not break. Grace corrected them gently, her voice calm even when the wind roared around them. The Kalari admired her patience. They began calling her the woman who ties the storm. Ethan Cole worked in the clinic with his Kalari apprentices. He showed them how to use small medical kits and trained them to handle common sickness. The clinic stayed busy. Weak lungs, shallow coughs, and stress lined the days. Ethan kept his tone steady, reminding patients that help was close. At night, he wrote notes in simple words so the Kalari could continue care when humans were not nearby. One apprentice, a quiet boy named Relin, looked at Ethan with shining eyes. He whispered one evening, "I will heal my people like you." Ethan put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You already are." Marco Young had the hardest task. Supplies were running thin. Every crate mattered. He counted and recounted, moving goods between shelters and the ship. He taught Kalari how to track stock and showed them how to repair broken crates. He made them laugh with dry jokes even when the numbers grew smaller each week. He knew they would not have enough to finish the move unless Earth sent more. But Earth was far away, and other powers blocked many routes. Marco hid his worry behind calm smiles, but at night he sat alone, writing lists again and again. One evening, Alien called a council with Daniel and Laura. The elders gathered, their faces lined with fear and hope. Alien spoke softly. We feel the storms growing worse. We see the light of our star fading. If we wait too long, the move will be impossible. What do you need from us to begin? Daniel spread the maps across the table. His finger traced the route from the camp to the valley where the first launch site would be built. We need hands, he said. We need builders and carriers. We will move supplies first, then families in waves. Alien nodded. You will have every hand we can spare. The work became a race against time. Humans and Kalari worked from dawn until long after the pale star set. They hauled beams, built platforms, and dug anchors deep into the valley floor. The valley would hold the launch pads where ships could land and take people to the moon. Storms hit often, but work never stopped completely. When winds howled too strong, people tied themselves with lines and kept building. Their voices rose above the storm, chanting together in rhythm. The camp was no longer quiet. It was alive with purpose, but trouble came from outside. One night, Nora intercepted a direct message. The words were cold and final. Cease or be removed. This is your last warning. Daniel read it in silence. Then he said, let them come. We will not stop. Laura looked at him, her eyes worried but steady. She knew the risks, yet she also knew they had no choice. The Kalari had no future if Earth turned back. The threat became real 2 days later. A small craft landed beyond the ridge. Its hull bore the marks of a distant empire that had ignored the Kalari plea. Armed figures stepped out, their armor bright and sharp. They did not greet the camp. They walked to the edge and demanded to see Daniel. He met them with calm steps. His voice stayed even. We came because they asked. We will not leave. The leader of the strangers sneered. You play at being heroes. You bring disorder. Leave now or we will make you. The Kalari gathered behind Daniel, silent but firm. Laura stepped beside him, her voice strong. We are not playing. We are building life. If you want to stop us, you will have to do it in front of them. She pointed to the Kalari elders, to the children clutching their parents' hands. For a long moment, silence stretched. The strangers looked at the storm-battered camp, at the shelters glowing with steady light. They looked at humans and Kalari standing together. Then they turned and left without another word. Their craft lifted into the dark sky and was gone. The camp exhaled as one. Daniel spoke softly. We keep building. After that day, the bond grew stronger still. Kalari spoke openly of Earth as family. They sang songs in both tongues. Children carried tools with pride. Humans smiled more, even through their tiredness. They all knew danger was still near, but they also knew they were not alone. Laura's lab produced more good news. A new strain of fruit adapted faster than expected. She shared it with the camp. The taste was sharp but sweet. Kalari children laughed when juice dripped down their chins. Laura wiped her hands on her coat and smiled wider than she had in weeks. She told Daniel they will not only live, they will thrive. He nodded. That is all we came for. As weeks passed, the launch site in the valley grew stronger. Platforms were finished. Beacons lit the path through the storms. The first test of moving supplies succeeded. Crates reached the valley safely. Marco allowed himself a small grin. It works, he said simply. Daniel clapped his shoulder. It is only the start. One night after a long day, aliens stood before the camp. They raised their voice so all could hear. We once believed the stars would not answer us, but Earth answered. You stood in our storm when others turned away. From this day, Kalari and Earth are bound. We will not forget. The camp cheered, humans and Kalari together. The sound rose high into the stormy night. For the first time in a long time, hope was louder than fear. But Daniel knew the hardest work was still ahead. The evacuation had not yet begun. Supplies were thin, storms were stronger, and enemies still circled above. Yet when he looked at the camp, the shelters glowing, the Kalari singing, his crew still steady, he felt the quiet truth. They had already changed the future. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Earth's Deathworlders had not come as monsters. They had come as builders, as protectors, as friends. The final stage of the Kalari rescue came with both hope and fear. The launch site in the valley was ready. The platforms were strong, the beacons glowed steady, and the first cargo runs had succeeded. But the star above was weaker every day, and the storms grew harsher with every cycle. The Kalari could no longer wait. It was time to move their people. Daniel Harris stood before his crew one morning, his voice calm as always. Today we begin, he said. No one will be left behind. We will move in waves until all are safe. He looked around the circle of tired but determined faces. Laura, Grace, Ethan, Marco, Nora, and the rest. Each nodded, each ready. They had been tested by storms and threats, and they had not broken. Now came the hardest part. The first wave was the elders and the sick. The Kalari gathered near the shelters, holding hands, their eyes full of both fear and trust. Ethan Cole moved among them with his apprentices, checking lungs and handing out warm blankets. He reassured them with quiet words. Laura and Cyril carried samples of crops packed carefully to survive the journey. Grace led the teams that strapped crates onto sleds and carried them down to the valley. The walk to the valley was long and rough. The ground cracked in places, and sudden winds forced the lines to stop and hold fast. Humans and Kalari leaned into the gusts together, their bodies tied with ropes to keep from being blown away. Children clung to parents, but they did not cry. They looked at the humans who walked steady and calm, and they copied that courage. At the valley, the first ships waited. Their engines hummed low, ready for launch. Marco checked every crate twice, then waved them aboard. Nora guided the families, her voice clear and kind. When the first ship lifted, carrying Kalari into the sky toward their new home, the camp below erupted in cheers. Alien, standing beside Daniel, whispered, "Our people are leaving death behind." Daniel nodded. "They are going toward life," but the work did not slow. The second wave began almost at once. Storms hit harder that day. Black winds cutting across the valley, anchors strained, and dust filled the air. Grace shouted over the noise, guiding lines to keep people moving. Her hands bled from rope burns, but she did not stop. The Kalari youths followed her lead, tying knots even in the storm. When a shelter crate tipped, 3 of them caught it before it could crash. Grace smiled through grit and said, "Good work." Laura stayed close to the scientists and farmers. She carried boxes of seeds and showed the Kalari how to protect them from the wind. Cyril held a bundle of shoots like they were treasure. "Life will follow us," he kept saying. Daran nodded, his face streaked with dust, his eyes bright with hope. Laura thought of Earth, of farmers who had once carried seeds across oceans. She felt the same weight and the same promise. The third wave was the largest, filled with families and workers. The camp seemed to empty as lines stretched toward the valley. Daniel walked among them, steady and calm, his presence like an anchor. A child stumbled in the dust, and he lifted her onto his shoulders without breaking stride. The Kalari around him whispered words of respect in their own tongue. They no longer saw humans as reckless strangers. They saw them as kin, but danger still circled. The ships that had watched from orbit drew closer. Nora intercepted sharp signals that spoke of action. She told Daniel quietly, "They may try to stop us." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Then we move faster," he said. "Tell the crews to push." That night, as the fourth wave prepared, a new storm struck. It was the worst yet. Lightning split the sky in endless lines. The ground shook as if the world itself was breaking apart. Shelters rattled and lines snapped. For a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm the Kalari. But then they saw the humans moving through the storm, tying ropes, steadying beams, lifting children. Daniel's voice cut through the thunder. "Hold fast, we will not break." His crew echoed him. Grace pulled lines back into place. Marco shouted counts over the wind. Laura shielded seedlings with her own body. Ethan carried a child through the rain of dust, his coat wrapped around them. Together they stood. When the storm eased, the camp still stood. The Kalari looked around, stunned. They began to chant softly, a new word that meant those who stand in the storm. It spread through the camp like fire. Humans and Kalari together repeated it, their voices rising until it drowned out the last rumble of thunder. The final waves began at dawn. The valley was crowded with ships, their engines glowing. Families boarded quickly, carrying only what they could hold. Crates of supplies and seedlings filled the holds. The Kalari sang as they boarded, their voices trembling but proud. Alien stood with Daniel and Laura watching. "You have given us a future," Alien said. "We will not forget." Laura's eyes filled, but she only said, "Take care of what we built together." Daniel placed a hand over his chest and nodded. At last, the final ship prepared to lift. Only the crew of Horizon Dawn and a few Kalari remained. They stood on the valley floor looking up at the fading star. Daniel spoke softly. "This world gave all it could. Now it is time to go." The Kalari elders bowed, pressing their hands to the ground one last time. Then they boarded. As the last engines roared, the valley shook. The ships rose, carrying the Kalari to their new home. Horizon Dawn followed, its hull scratched and weathered, but its heart steady. In orbit, the moon glowed pale, waiting. Already, machines had begun to change its air. Already, shelter stood ready. The Kalari would live there, and they would thrive. In the control deck, Nora reported steady signals. Marco confirmed supplies were secure. Ethan sat with his apprentices, who would now become healers for their people. Grace leaned back, her hands bandaged but strong. Laura stared at her plants, already imagining fields on the moon. Daniel looked out the window at the ships in formation. His voice was quiet, but it carried. They asked the galaxy for help. The galaxy turned away, but Earth answered. When the Kalari landed on their new home, cheers echoed across the valley floor. They stepped onto the moon's soil, their eyes wide, their hearts full. Children ran ahead, their laughter rising into the thin air. Elders wept openly. Alien lifted their voice and spoke to all. We were abandoned, but we were not lost. Earth came. Earth stood with us. From this day our lives are bound. The crowd shouted in reply, their voices strong. For the humans, it was not glory they sought. It was not power. It was the simple truth that someone had asked and they had answered. They built, they carried, they stood in storms. They gave the Kalari a chance. And in return, the Kalari gave them trust that no threat could erase. Far away, other powers whispered in fear and respect. They had seen Earth's Deathworlders not as destroyers, but as saviors. A new story spread across the galaxy. When others turned away, Earth had walked into the storm. When others said no, Earth said yes. And that simple word changed everything. In the quiet after, Daniel stood with his crew on the moon's surface. The sky was dark, the stars bright. The Kalari built fires nearby, their songs drifting across the new camp. Laura stood beside him, her eyes tired but shining. Grace, Ethan, Marco, Nora, all of them looked at the stars with the same thought. They had done what they came to do. They had given hope, Daniel whispered, not for the first time, this is what we do. And the crew of Horizon Dawn knew it was true. They had answered a call that others ignored. They had stood in the storm, and they would carry that truth with them wherever they went. The Kalari plea had gone out to the stars. Only Earth had answered. And because of that, a people who were once doomed now had a future. The galaxy would remember. Earth's Deathworlders were not monsters. They were saviors who heard a cry in the dark and chose to answer with open hands and steady hearts.